I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and with me today is my fellow host, Salman Huck, and a special guest, San Jose State University legend, Terry Cannon. So Terry grew up in the LA area, played basketball for Crenshaw High School, and actually was awarded City Player of the Year and won a state title in his senior season in 1989. Terry went on to play basketball up at San Jose State University, where he was a second team All Big West Conference selection and ranks 7th on the school's all-time scoring list. So Terry went on to play in some Pro-Am leagues in San Francisco and LA. And currently, when he's not helping business executives streamline operational efficiency and hire talent globally, he actively works with kids and adults in basketball. So if you're in the Bay Area, you might see him at a business conference or training some folks on the basketball court. So Terry was gracious enough to spend some time with us talking about his journey from LA to San Jose and some of the folks that he's played ball against, and shared some real nuggets of wisdom. So without further ado, here is our conversation with, again, San Jose State University legend, Terry Cannon. First of all, thank you, Terry. Really appreciate you making the time to come talk with us on the 4040 Vision podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, man. It's hot. It's hot here in the Bay, but other than that, I'm nimble, I'm flexible, and I try to stay cool from the inside out. So I'm good.
All right. Yeah, I'm up in Sacramento, and it was 111, 112 yesterday, and I think it's going to be about 105, so a little cooler today.
Yeah, I get it.
So we just wanted to talk with you about your journey to San Jose State, and the records that you've set there, and everything that you've accomplished there, and of course everything that you've accomplished since then. But I wanted to start off, take us back to your childhood and what it was like, coming up in the Crenshaw area in the 70s and 80s, which is were you born there and you came all the way up through high school in Crenshaw?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, let me express my thanks to you, and I know him as Bobby, man. So that's where I got to go with this. Thank you to each of you guys for inviting me on. Definitely appreciate it, and appreciate the invite. But I grew up in Los Angeles, as you mentioned, in the 70s and the 80s, in Los Angeles, and it was a kind of a fertile time as it relates to basketball. I went to Crenshaw High, and Crenshaw is kind of a nationally recognized basketball program, producing many pro athletes in basketball, football, and baseball. And so it was very competitive in terms of the LA city area, in terms of, the level of talent, and a lot of kids from different areas found their way at Crenshaw because it was a kind of a fertile, athletic and academic environment. And so it was some fun times, man, fun times, great battles. I really, kind of developed my chops, if you will, on a basketball court as a result.
Yeah. And when did you start playing basketball? Did you start, as soon as you could walk type thing, or were you a late bloomer here?
Yeah, no Tiger Woods type of story for you, man. Hey, you come out the womb and your dad nurtures you onto the golf course, or, puts you right on the court or whatever. And, it's like, my first words wasn't basketball, or anything like that. So I actually started playing, basketball like in my teens, like early teens, really about 12. I was more of a football guy in terms of Pop Warner football. So that was kind of my first sort of love in terms of football. So I played football, played a lot of the skill positions there, from linebacker when I was younger to running back to a little bit of wide receiver to safety. So that was really my first love in terms of football. And then I migrated over to basketball because obviously during the off seasons, you got basketball courts up at the park and things like that. No one hops on the, at the park or at the playground and be like, hey man, let's go 5-on-5,
Mm-hmm.
Let's do some flag here. But the basketball court is there, right? You could just be yourself in the ball. And so I started to pick up the ball and I started playing from there.
So there wasn't like you take a nasty hit or something and decide to make a change.
Yeah, man, it wasn't. Yeah, I was actually, kind of shifty. I had a couple of moves in my belt, Khalid, and so I didn't take a lot of hard shots. I was kind of nifty. But for me, it was a matter of just being able to play kind of more often. You're at recess, things like that. When you're at school, you're able to play, and so that's how I really started to kind of migrate over to the game. And then a lot of when I was even younger, football players would try to use basketball as a means to kind of stay in shape themselves as well.
Yeah,
So it wasn't uncommon for a multi sport athlete to find themselves playing basketball.
And did you play both in high school or just basketball?
I actually played just basketball in high school. I have a good family friend of our families who is actually even present day. He's the football coach at Crenshaw, and he was the coach there when I was even younger. And so my family was tight with him. And at one point he wanted me to play football, but I actually ended up playing basketball all through my high school years.
Got it. And did you come from an athletic family? Do you have any siblings, or did your dad play ball growing up?
Good question. My uncle was more so my influence as it relates to basketball. My dad wasn't an athlete. My siblings aren't necessarily athletes, and so my uncle was the one who kind of groomed me into playing. Once he's, I was always supported on the football field, et cetera, but I didn't come from like this long generation of athletes and those sorts of things. But my uncle played basketball a little bit in the service. He played in high school. And so he was the one that at times would take me to the park. He was the one who would kind of, at times, play some older guys to play me on the court, just to, get me a little tougher, make me a little better. So my uncle is my ultimate influence when it comes to that.
That's great. And, when you were in high school, was there a certain point, maybe a certain game or after a certain season, where you thought, maybe I could do this at the next level? I could play at the college level?
Well, high school was very interesting in the sense that you had it was not uncommon to see multiple high school players, to go D1. When I was a junior in high school and I played varsity, 9 members of my team went D1 of some level. So
wow, I'm assuming you had like 15 guys on the team.
About 12.
12. Okay.
12 guys.
Wow.
So you're talking 9 out of 12, which is, unheard of. Even if you stack that up to modern times, you might have a team, an elite team that might have 5-6 people go D1. Yeah. But, my high school team, that's how competitive it was, as I started out saying, very competitive. On my team, when I was a junior, you had 9 guys go D1. For me, it wasn't necessarily a game, but it was just a matter of the culture. It was pretty competitive. One of the guys that was on my high school team, his dad coached at UCLA, a gentleman by the name of Walt Hazard. So if you ever kind of look it up back in the day, he was the coach for UCLA, and his son was on my high school team. And so it wasn't uncommon to say, hey, you know what, I'm around coaches and people who can kind of go to the next level. And as I said, my high school was pretty famous for producing college athletes and pro athletes.
Mm-hmm. And is that the year that you guys won the national title, or was that the following year?
We won it my senior year. So we won it in 89.
State title. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we won a state title. But previous to that, in 88, we had won kind of a city title. Before that time, there was multiple titles. There's multiple banners in my gym to this day. My coach, who's since retired, is, considered a somewhat of a legend or whatnot in terms of high school athletics in the LA area. And so yeah, man, it was, some banners around. Now I live in the Bay, and the Bay, it's like, hey, man, wherever I'm at, I'm going to be around some championship banners and some stuff happening.
Yeah, you're bringing up that championship pedigree wherever you go.
Harry, tell us how did you end up here in the Bay? Why did you choose San Jose State? And were you considering any other schools? Were you trying to stay in the LA area? Tell us, how did you end up here?
Yeah. So interesting enough, when I was actually a senior in high school, until towards the latter part of my senior season, I wasn't really highly recruited, and so when I was actually in school and I was playing, and you're talking, midway through my senior year, towards the latter part of my senior years, I didn't necessarily, it wasn't like, people were just banging down my door. And so finally, towards the latter part of the season, we're talking like towards the latter end of kind of like the regular season before you go into, the playoffs, if you will, the CIF playoffs and all that sort of stuff. Then that's when I started to get far more attention. And so then you had some of the kind of bigger schools at the time, whether it was UCLA, Oklahoma, UTEP, and some of these other kind of schools that was really kind of more highly recruiting me. But, at that particular time, I didn't necessarily know if those things were going to be kind of a done deal for me. So for me, understanding that, hey, I really wanted to secure my college education, not knowing, what was going to happen in terms of those recruitment years. So I had some schools that were, kind of, recruiting me pretty regularly, and San Jose State was one of them. And so when I reviewed some of those options, thinking that I could stay in California, wouldn't be as if, hey, I'm shooting over to the East, going into, Chicago and some cold weather and stuff like that. I had to weigh those factors out. It's like, what, hey, I can do this and stay in California and kind of, for modern day expression, secure the bag, if you will, in terms of my college education, Bobby, and say, hey, I'll choose San Jose State. So that was a kind of one of the reasons why. And then I had a good friend of mine who was a quarterback at Crenshaw High. He lived in my neighborhood. His name was Doug, and Doug played quarterback for San Jose State. And so I would watch his games on TV, et cetera, and, kind of support him. He's from my neighborhood. I would support him. And so I knew of San Jose State from that. And then I, had my recruitment visits and stuff like that. And then I just made the decision to choose San Jose State.
Yeah, I think the location is definitely an underrated aspect of that. I just did an interview last week with a buddy of mine that played Division II, and he started his career in Bellevue, Nebraska. Okay. And he left after a year just because it was too cold, it was too isolated, and he ended up playing in San Diego. So I totally get that. Especially, he's from Arizona, you're from LA, so some warm weather guys.
Yes.
You don't want to get stuck out in the cold. Is there a particular game or moment at San Jose State that you're particularly proud of, like maybe the highlight of your college career?
Well, I have multiple moments, but one that just come to mind immediately is that when I played against Cal, and I played, that's when Jason Kidd was there, and when I also played against Santa Clara, those were always proud moments because it's local, right? It's just like any sort of institution that has close ties within a geographic area to other colleges. So, when you think of it, like, Stanford and Cal, you think of it as like going to be a situation like you mentioned, Arizona, Arizona State and Arizona, Oregon State. Anytime you're in a close proximity, those create kind of a naturalness in terms of how organic a rivalry could possibly brew. Right. So some of my proud moments came up when I was playing against Jason Kidd, when I played against Steve Nash, those particular schools, whether I traveled to Cal, or they came down to San Jose State, or I traveled over to, Santa Clara. Those were good. Another moment for me that stood out is also when I played against Minnesota. This is when the HP Pavilion in San Jose was newly kind of constructed. And so, we played in there as kind of like a Northern California classic, if you will, games in terms of, inviting different colleges to play. And I played against Minnesota at that particular time. And so, I played against some schools that were kind of far east, Lansing, Michigan. I played against Michigan State and some other folks and stuff like that. Unfortunately, Steve Smith wasn't playing in that game. He was hurt. But whenever I played in those kind of games, to where it was kind of like, hey, big locally, with either the local schools or the venue, large venue, hey, you're playing, the stadium seats 20,000 folks, those are always special moments.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a couple Hall of Fame players in Steve Nash and Jason Kidd, who between those two guys, or maybe somebody else that you played against, because you played, pretty some good competition, guys at like UNLV, schools like that. Who's the best player that you played against?
Yeah, that's a common question, but the way I normally dissect it is, players are uniquely talented in different ways. And so for me, just like there's always going to be a running debate, like, hey, who's the best? Who's the greatest ever, right? But for me, I normally kind of just look at it in different ways. Sometimes I say, hey, who's the best that you played against at the position? Who's just the overall best? Who was just a beast, out there in terms of, how you looked at things. And, for me, there was multiple different guys. Like, you mentioned UNLV, for instance. I played against UNLV when they were ranked number one in the nation, where they won a national title.
Yeah, that was their peak, right? The Jerry Tarkanian days. Yeah.
That's right. I like your knowledge share. I like your knowledge share going back there. Hey, I'm a little older now, and I can appreciate the fact that you kind of can track with me back a little bit.
This is a sports history podcast for a reason. So.
Hey, man, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Hey, plug kudos to you guys for, having the homework. I love it. So yeah, those guys, man, those are some of the better guys, that I played against, whether you're talking Larry Johnson, whether you're talking, Stacey Ogman, those guys, whether, Greg Anthony's, those guys were, really highly talented. But also a sleeper guy on the list is when I played, a guy named Randy Brown. Randy Brown played for the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan on those Jordan teams. And so he got some chips under his belt. And he also, has done some coaching over the years. But he was a beast, at his position, at the point guard position, even back then. Still staying with the Jordan connection. One of my good friends played against Jordan. He played on the Utah Jazz, and hey, Jordan hit the shot, classic, iconic shot in his face. I don't really want to bring that up too much.
Painful memories, yeah.
Painful memory. I'm trying to stay away from my buddy's name because it's already kind of out there or whatever. But hey, he played in my conference. Cedric Ceballos went on to play. Phoenix. Running against him and Bruce Bowen and those guys. And those guys, at least Bruce got multiple chips, played with one of the, I feel one of the, greatest power forwards to ever do it in terms of Tim Duncan. So there was a lot of talented guys that, that I was running up against, playing, every night. And so when you say best player, it's for me, it's not that I'm trying to duck the question, but it's just that, hey, you know what?
I get it.
So many good guys, man.
Yeah. I mean, some of the teams that you played, the guys that you mentioned, some NBA legends, Greg Anthony, Larry Johnson, et cetera, et cetera. There's a long list. How about this? Who is the most memorable player that you played against? How about that?
Hey, that's fair enough. Fair enough. Shoot another question at me or whatever. That's what good podcasters do. I would say, not to continue with this, with the UNLV vibe, but I would say Greg Anthony was really one of the more memorable guys I played against, because obviously we was at the same position, we guarding each other, et cetera. And I feel that he was one of the guys who kind of welcomed me to the difference in the college game versus the high school game. And memorable is something that kind of has stuck with me in terms of, you hear the expression, there's levels to this, right? I don't know if you've ever heard that expression, but
yeah, definitely.
There's levels to this. So you go from high school and then you go to a different level to D1. And he was one of the guys that showed that helped for me to visibly see, oh, hey, I'm going to be really playing against guys on a regular basis that are more athletic, stronger, faster, quicker than I am in certain areas. Some that I'm going to, be those things to them, but I'm also going to be giving my fair doses of guys who's going to be, stronger, quicker, faster than I am. So, hey, how am I going to, from an intellectual basis, move my game to a different level? Now that you're going from high school. In high school, if you're the most talented guy, if you're the most skilled guy, then hey, man, you can dominate probably, pretty much every night, or you can turn it on when you need to. Hey, you know what? I've had 2 bad quarters or this, that, and the other. Hey, I'm gonna turn this on. I'm gonna flip the switch. But Greg Anthony was one of those guys when I played against him, and I saw the intelligence he played with. I saw the quickness he played with, the strength he played with. Obviously, there's a different level of confidence, all these different things. He stood out as really one of the more memorable guys because all of those elements were not at play. It wasn't just, oh, man, this guy's good. This guy's talented, but it's like, oh, okay, there's an intelligence to the game here on a different level. There's skill that has to be there. There's an intensity that has to be there. There's a mindset that has to be there, and all of those things is what made it memorable. Not just, hey, you know what, this guy was just really so good or something.
Yeah. I mean, and he went on to, I think, play 10, 12 years in the NBA. So you're spot on there. And then, so I know you ended your college career on a high note. You're the leading scorer on the team that 93-94 season. Did you have any ambitions at that point to play pro basketball? Did you do any workouts for any teams or anything like that?
Good question. So at the time, I really wasn't like wholeheartedly pursuing basketball, but there was an inkling because you still got that competitive fire. It's like, hey, you know what? I know that I can do it because, I have friends who played. I grew up in an environment like that. And I played against these skilled players and held my own. Some of the guys you mentioned or whatever, hey, I held my own against, guys like that. So, I knew that was something that I could do. But again, just kind of like high school, it wasn't as if, I had pro scouts beating by my door. In my senior season, I had torn my ACL the season prior, like in my junior year. And so even though I came back pretty strong, I didn't necessarily have the pro level of looks as I did at one point. At one point, like, in my junior year, there was kind of like, hey, there's a lot of, local teams and other teams that might be interested in, hey, seemed like they like your game or whatnot. I had heard some of that level of talk. But after I tore my ACL, there wasn't that case. So after school, after college, it's like, okay, hey, is this something I can do? And so I ended up playing in the Pro-Am League in Irvine. And that's when I was playing with Cedric Ceballos. I was playing with Mark Jackson, Tracy Murray. I don't know if you can go back in your database that far. All these guys, I'm playing with these guys. And, like I said, I was doing pretty good, but I still didn't have kind of a lot of offers. And so at that time, and I know I'm going along into the story, so bear with me, but
please do.
Yeah. I'm just trying to give you some context.
Yeah.
So, at that time, playing there, and and I'm in the Pro M League with these guys, these guys were already established pros at the time. And so, I was kind of the backup to Mark Jackson. And so, I'm coming in and spelling them and stuff like that, and, doing well, my 15 minutes or whatever it was. And, I'm young, et cetera. So then I started to get a little bit of, hey, that's the kid from San Jose State kind of deal, whatever. And so I started to get some overseas offers at that point. And so, we're talking to kind of the top leagues in Europe, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And I remember one particular situation, like the top league in Germany, and it was they were going to choose between me and another guy that they wanted to bring over. And at the time, we're talking kind of mid 90s at the time. I know I'm dating myself here. Mid 90s. And so at that time they were offering me basically about 125,000 in terms of the contract. And that would have been kind of 8 months. Now I was going to have to be overseas. And so at that time, that was pretty good. At that time, engineers in today's society might make 150 or something like that as a starting base. So back then that was decent.
It's a good chunk of change. Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. And so I was excited about that. And so then they selected a guy over me. And I didn't know this until they selected him at the last minute, a guy by the name of Lester Connors. And Lester Connors was a guy who actually played in the NBA. And now he's an NBA official. He's an NBA official, a current NBA official, probably for the last 30 years or something like that. Okay, so they selected him over me. And so when they selected Lester over me, he had the pro experience. And Lester is taller than I am. They had their reasons, in terms of selecting him. It was like, oh man, that was a crushing blow to me, because all my other offers were like a vast dip. And so it went from like 125 to like 30,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
20,000. And I was like, man, I'm not going to be overseas for that amount of time, even though it was US dollars and stuff like that. And, I'm in a whole different country and things like that. I just didn't really feel that was going to be kind of my calling. So I began to kind of, work on, my work experience and things like that, and at the time, I started hanging tight with my girlfriend at the time, who was, became my wife or whatnot. And, it was like, I don't want to do that. And then years after that, some of the Warrior scouts began to contact me, because I was still kind of playing in the Pro M League in San Francisco. So, I was still trying to play or whatever, just for the love of the game and things of that nature. And so they wanted me to go to their G League. At the time it was called the CBA.
Yeah.
Okay? So now, right. as you well know, the D League or the G League now, back then it was the CBA. Mm-hmm. So they wanted me to go to their CBA team, kind of the same way that the Warriors now have their team in Santa Cruz. Yep. That's what they wanted me to do. And at that time, they were looking to kind of compensate me. Like, I think it was like $400 a week. And at that time, I had, my wife and I, we had given birth to my son, et cetera, and so forth. It's like, hey, I can't be skipping out like that, to play ball. And, I don't have a change or whatever to support my folks. And so that's kind of, where my journey from a player trying to advance to the next level, where it kind of fizzled out, because, unless I was going to make that 120, that 125, it was like, hey, I can't you can't take me from 125 to 20 to 30 and then take me from 30 to, 400 a week or whatever. It's like, oh man, I'm in the Bay Area. I could, I might have to do a little something different. Might have to pivot, do a little something different,
That's what we do here in the Bay, right?
That's right.
Yeah, you definitely had to make a business decision, and I can respect that. I think, these days guys probably have a lot more options, more overseas leagues. I know the G League definitely pays better than $400 a week. It's almost like you were going to play like single A baseball or something back then. So no, I totally get that. So, what was that transition like to corporate America, going from trying to play ball professionally to, maybe not putting on a shirt and tie, but sitting behind a desk?
Yeah. So you can see right now, kind of a little bit at the desk for the most part right now, right? Just handling, doing business. But at the same degree, the adjustment always, for any kind of transition is typically met with, some moments to where, there's not quite the clarity because you're going into something new. You're going into something that could be different. You're going to some things to where you got to make some decisions as it relates to forks in the road. Am I going to go down this path to the right? I'm going to go down this path to the left. So in certain aspects of it is going to be some ambiguity, some uncertainty. So the same was true with me. But much like in athletics or in basketball or any sport, et cetera, you have to be able to kind of dig deep and begin to develop a mindset to where you can say, hey, I have to kind of believe in myself and try to, make it happen, especially if you feel like, okay, hey, I've done the preparation, I've done the work, right? Like, hey, you're going to hear that expression, in terms of with athletes, hey, when I'm coaching athletes or players, it's really, hey, are you putting in the work, right? And so if you know that, hey, you're in the right environment, et cetera, to grow and to develop, you're putting in the work. And for me, the transition was, hey, now I got to put in the work on the corporate side. Now I got to put in the work in terms of developing skills, in terms of, interviewing skills, looking at understanding a corporate company. How does it work? What does the Silicon Valley mean? What does it mean? You hear it all the time, but now what does it mean? How does one advance? What kind of skills you need in order to get into a position and to obtain that position and then grow? What does it mean to be promoted? So all these sorts of things when you're younger, fresh out of college, you might have some exposure from an academic aspect, a class structure, but now you have to walk the path, and it's kind of like, hey, you know what? You have preseason, and all that and what you're doing there. And then you start to get into training camp, and training camp is where, the transition aspect is for you, because now all of a sudden, hey, you got to learn some things by doing it. You got to learn some things by getting rejected from some interviews and stuff like that. And then you got to learn, hey, man, why did they reject me? Or could I have said that better? Could I have done that? Could I have brought out my experience, my background in a way that made it more compelling for me to be the best fit for this position? Or, you know what, hey, now I understand that, hey, that's really not the position I thought it was. It reads to me this way on paper, the job description, but it's really not really that way, because now I'm now doing it. And you learn a lot about yourself. So that's the way I was, man. It was a bit of a transition. But then I began to kind of, navigate myself in kind of, the corporate structures, and then ultimately begin to start to develop, hey, what do I want my path to look like? What do I, want my experience to be? What kind of job would be best for me as a person, my genuine, authentic self? You start to kind of learn a lot about that. It's like, hey, am I the guy on the assembly line, or am I going to be another person guy in the company? Am I going to be the creative developer in the company, or am I going to be, someone else or whatever? You're based upon my skill sets, my personality, and all that. So that's how Absolutely. It was for me,
Yeah. And Terry, I know also, in addition to your corporate job, you do training, and that's how I kind of met you at the gym. I saw you training guys. Talk us through that. How did you decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to start training people, and when did you start up, and how did you get that start? And then I know, and this is when I first saw you, you were training Robert Parra, the owner of the Grizzlies. So talk us through all of that.
Yeah. So, like with anything, man, once some things are kind of in your blood a bit, basketball and just that whole aspect, part of the aspect of basketball, I feel, in all sports is that sports is a way to kind of develop character. It's a way to reveal character. Okay. And so for me, the developing and revealing of the character in terms of athletics and how we see it plays out is that ultimately I hope it would produce in people an aspect to where they will want to give back, pay some things forward, and so that's what we all begin to understand. When you start to look back on your journey, you begin to see that, hey, you know what, there was a teacher back there that really kind of helped me out at a moment that I needed a little help. There was a coach back there that really said something that was impactful that stick with me to this day. In terms, it could just be a word of encouragement. It could be, just something, different, or just having a different experience, or the fact that I couldn't do something very well, that there was a person that was there to say, you know what, even though you can't do that well, you can still be good at that. You could still excel at it. And you might have aspirations of doing something. And that's the way I was. So that's how I got into training, in terms of really wanting to kind of, say, hey, for the experiences I've had, and the people I know and places I've been, et cetera, and so forth, let me take some time to kind of pay it forward, and, working with kids and working with young adults and things like that. And doing some things as it relates to, player development and basketball development. Because, Maya Angelou has a famous, she's a famous, poet and actress and things of that nature. She said, at our best, we're all teachers. At our best, we're all teachers. Meaning that, hey, you know what? If I have something, Bobby, man, Khalid, if I have something that I could share that could help you along your way, or you share something that helps me, et cetera, or to kids or adults, we're teaching each other, we're learning, and we're all better as a result of it, especially if you're doing that positively. So that's how I got involved in training and really wanting to kind of, pay some things forward, still have a little bit of love of the game. And then it helped me too, benefited me too a little bit, because, hey, it gives me a reason to want to try to stay in shape a bit, and, still be able to play and do some things. It gives you that reason, that motivation. And so it's like, hey, man, we all benefited from this thing. And it was cool.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. And Terry is one of the best trainers. I've seen him train so many people at the gym, and Terry's one hell of a guard still to this day. So just letting people know that.
Oh, man,
he's still a beast, So Terry,
man,
tell us, how did you end up linking with Robert Pera? Because I used to see you guys training, and we always used to ask him, you want a ball? And he'd be like, no, I'm training. And then I played with him one time, and my God, Terry, I don't know how you trained this guy up, but he just killed us in that half court game. I remember that. But tell us how you hooked up with Robert Pera.
Yeah. So actually, there were some guys that I didn't even know that he knew. He had actually knew some people from San Jose State.
Okay.
Because he's kind of a native from the area, and they directed him my way, and so he actually reached out to me, and okay. So he reached out to me and like, hey, I've been kind of like really wanting to get myself in shape or whatever, but I'm not going to necessarily be the guy, kind of like myself. And hey, I'm not going to be the guy that's in the weight room and stuff like that. I need to have kind of a reason, a motivation to do all this other kind of stuff. And so he talked to me a little bit about things. So he and I set up a meeting, and I basically talked to him and broke down, hey, this is my background. This is who I am. This is, my training methodology. This is kind of, what, where I hope to take individuals, try to get a sense of what his objectives are, what his goals are. And I treated it just like, I would anybody else, a parent who came to me with their 13-year-old son, or if I was working with someone in junior college that is, hey, I'm trying to make it to the next level. I'm in junior college, but I'm trying to do D1. I'm trying to get better over my summers. I'm trying to be in the lab, as we speak, putting in that work. Right. So Robert is one of those guys who, and as I began to know him and work with him, he, as in terms of a technical professional, which is common in the Valley, you got to be about the work or whatever, individually. And that's what, the game of basketball should be teaching individuals to be able to, hey, sharpen your tools, getting in the lab sometimes, and you're going to be the only one in the lab doing that experiment. You're going to be the only one in there working on your game. You're going to be the only one in there putting in shots, et cetera, and and if it's good, let's do it behind the scenes. Let's not do it just so, hey, you can just put it on the gram or something like that. Let's do it because, hey, this is, hey, you want to get better. So he and I met under those circumstances. And after we met, and we started to get into our commonalities and also me able to kind of, share with him my methodology and kind of, where my path has led me in terms of basketball, then it just made for a good fit. And then obviously I was able to springboard that, because even at the time when I met him and then going through his purchasing of the Grizzlies and kind of being involved in that process, at that same time, I was able to kind of share and touch base with him, because at the time when he purchased the Grizzlies, Lionel Hollins was the coach for the Grizzlies. One of Lionel's assistants, as it relates to player development, is a friend of mine who also played with Steve Nash, Lloyd Pierce. Lloyd Pierce is a local Oakland guy who played at Santa Clara with Steve Nash. And so all of those sorts of things for he and I started to click. And then that's when we begin to, go through the training and look at player development, when, looking at some talent as they, trying to look at bringing some talent into the Grizzly or whatever, and being able to make some assessments on that. And so that it was, some fun times and, just another part of my basketball journey, man, which was real cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us, what was that like working with some of the Grizzly players? I know you had like Mike Miller working out at the gym with you at some point. Dante Jones, you guys worked out there at the gym. I know you said you worked with like Tony Allen and those guys. So what was that like? And did you like play against them, or how did you like kind of get into that?
Yeah, it is, that's all Robert's doing, man. That's that's his ability, to be able to have, that sort of means to make those things happen. So that, I all credit to him, man. Robert is a great guy. He's also, really one of the hardest, really a hardworking guy as well, in terms of he embodies the grit and the grind of the grindhouse in terms of the Grizzlies. I'm talking from an owner perspective. Under me knowing him and working with him, I know that that's kind of real in the sense that, hey, he puts in that grit and the grind on the technical side of technical development and stuff like that, which is kind of, what he does. And so I know after, working with him that's what he's all about. But he made it happen for me to be able to kind of have access to those guys and be able to kind of work with them from a player development aspect, from an assessment. Yeah, of course, I'm kind of hands-on, and I was, back then, you're very hands-on. So yeah, I'm bumping with some guys, I got my shoulder into some guys and whatever. I'm trying to, okay, you're trying to do that. I'm trying to make you have to adjust to some things. Also trying to like, hey, let's do some things to improve, hey, your release or your stamina, your, kind of your shot, your form, all these different sorts of things were things to where I was able to kind of work with those individuals. And Robert was the reason why, the way I had access.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah. And I know we're getting close to time here. So I know this is a sports podcast, but, our fellow host, Osama, who couldn't be here today, always asks food questions. So you're Bay Area local. You've been in the Bay for 30 years now, or a little more than 30 years now. What is your go-to restaurant? So say, maybe you and your wife are going out for a date, what's your go-to spot?
Oh man, I appreciate you doing this on this, and your colleagues, fellow podcasters' behalf, man. But man, I'm about to take you around then if that's the case.
Please do.
Yeah. So
we're like an undercover food podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, man. A little foodies around here or whatever. Got some stuff going on. Hey, man. It's just my personal preference, but I do like a lot of Thai food, and so to me you can't go wrong with that in terms of the freshness of the meals, the different things that I like to have, different spices, some mints, mint flavored stuff in there and all that kind of stuff, so I like a place called Solar Thai, to where, hey, I can get the things I need, get the quality, pineapple, fried rice and, little things.
I'm writing this down, by the way.
That's a great place, Terry. But the one next to the Bay Club's closing down?
Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that, man. Yeah. It's, the COVID effect, man, has impacted a lot of, retail and restaurants. And so it's not surprising, but I hate to hear that.
But they still have 2 other locations, so you're still good.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I will hit those up in the meantime, try to support as best I can. So you got that. And then, then I'll jump into some, something that's kind of more basic. I do like the Cheesecake Factory because I'm a cheesecake guy, you know what I mean? So, I can go in there and get all different types of cheesecake or whatever. So, I don't necessarily have to keep it to the main entrees, I don't got to do that. I'll just, hey, hey, baby, let's roll over here and I can get this nice little, this nice little cheesecake that I'm thinking about right here. Boom, and hey, you know what, October is coming around, November's coming around. They'll have a little pumpkin action happening or whatever. Let's roll. Let me find a way to get over to Santana Row so I can squeeze you over to the, Cheesecake Factory, so I'll dip from kind of like, the Thailand, I'll roll Thailand. I'll go something like Cheesecake Factory, and then I'll get into, just some other sort of things. There's some places in Oakland that I like, kind of like, Jamaican places. There used to be a great Indian place off of Mission that I can't think of the name of it right now. There's some French places, the La Papillon, I believe it is. It's a French restaurant.
So you got a diverse palette here.
Yeah, man, for sure. Just like my music is diverse. Just like my game is diverse, So, I'm gonna come with all of it, man. I'll get some curry in there. I'll get all the little stuff, man. I'm other than the fact that being super, super exotic, my palate is not gonna go, hey, let me try out some exotic worms from, from somewhere, I might be like, oh, a little squeamish. But
sure.
But in terms of my palate, man, I'm going all over the place, man, to get a little something, man. If it's good, it's great. Just like music, just like basketball, man. If you overseas, man, if you Luka, like, and you got game, man. That's just how it is. That's the fraternity of the game, and food is like that, man. It's like, hey, man, let's go break some bread together, man. Bobby, man, doesn't matter where we at, man. Is the food good? All Absolutely. Right, man. Let's roll. Let's roll. It could be Palo Alto. It could be San Francisco. Let's hang out. Have some good times. That's what it's about.
Love it. All right. So I'm asking just a couple quick hitter NBA ball questions, but before we let you go,
hey man, I got time for y'all, man. So no worries. I'm good.
Which player, who do you love watching most in the NBA today? Which player, or maybe a team?
Man. Man, that's it. That's really a good question. Because I'm so diverse, it's just so many different types of people I like to watch. From the guards to the various different positions. I will say, I like a lot of guys. I like guys like Bobby, man. I like two-way players. I like two-way players, man. That's just the way it is. So, when Kawhi is healthy, I like a guy that say, hey, I'm gonna take the toughest defensive assignment, and then I'm also going to play the game from both ends, right? From an intelligence perspective, from a offense defense perspective. So guys like that are typically the guys that I gravitate to, that are kind of like the more two-way players. And then you got a guy like a Chris Paul that you could be kind of an orchestrator. On the court, I'm making the right decisions. I'm getting people where they need to be. If I need to take big shots, hit big shots, I can. I can maybe get something done on a defensive end that can be a game changer, momentum changer. So a guy like that. I love to watch. And then we're spoiled in the Bay, man, in the sense that, hey, you know, we're surrounded by, you know, a great legacy of basketball just in the Bay. So there's been times to where, you know, I've been able to go to the Warriors practice and, you know, see them balling up close and personal. And it's like, you know, you can't help but appreciate, you know, some of the stuff we got right here in the Bay, man. You know, things that Steph does, moving right out the ball, the things that, you know, Clay is able to do, moving out the ball. Clay, you know, a healthy Clay, you know, two-way player, you know, got that mindset. Hey, you know what? You know, if I need to, I'm gonna play both ends, and I'm gonna have the stamina to do it. I'm gonna have the stamina to, you know, if I got to do this for 47 minutes, 43 minutes, I'm gonna do it. And hey, you know, you mess around, leave me open, you know, I'm gonna make you pay. You know, so those are the types of guys, you know, and you know that I like to watch in terms of, you know, two-way players.
I love it. Love it. Well, thank you again, Terry. Really appreciate it. This was great. Thank you for taking us on a journey with you from coming up from Crenshaw to San Jose State and everything that you've done in between and done since. So once again, yeah, really appreciate your time and you know, talking us through all this stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, likewise. Anything, Bobby, for sure. Appreciate you guys, man. Appreciate your time. Obviously, I love the knowledge share. Obviously, you guys are, you know, complementary to each other in terms of, you know, what you guys are doing, your flow and everything. Yeah. Yeah, man, this is great. I'm happy to know about it. It's a 40-40, baby. 40-40 podcast, whatever. Yeah. I'm happy to kind of learn about it on the fly. And, you know, yeah, man, continued success to you guys. And, you know, if there's anything, like I said, you know, if I could ever pay some things forward, you know, that's kind of what I'm about. So, you know, I just appreciate the invite.
Much appreciated.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you so much.
So that's our show for today. Once again, shout out to Terry Cannon for spending some time with us, dropping some knowledge and sharing some history and of course some nuggets of wisdom that he's picked